Thank you very much, Renata, for this kind welcome and flattering introduction. I also would like to thank the organizers for inviting me here to Belgrade. It's my very first visit to this town. So, the first thing I have to clarify is how do I get my images on top of the screen? I was told I have to push somewhere, but I would appreciate if that could be precise in this moment. Okay. And okay, so now you can go back. Thanks very much. Not the yesterday, not the tomorrow, only today is formable. With this laconic statement, the architect Mies van der Rohe entered the debate in 1923. This sentence belongs to one of the famous manifestos of ultimate realism in architecture, published in the avant-garde magazine G, of which Mies was a co-editor. This is what you see, the two manifestos. What such rigorous acknowledgement of the here and the now should mean for contemporary architects was made clear by the following imperative, I quote, "Create form out of the nature of the task with the means of our time, that is our work." Mies's realist call to order, demanding the architect to concentrate on the job at hand, was targeted against those who immediately after World War I were escaping from reality into fantastic utopias and otherworldly dreams, as the Expressionists did. The Expressionist utopia preached the gospel of the dissolution of all forms of traditional organization, be it the social organization of states, the cities, and in particular the architecture of fixed walls. This altogether prevented mankind from living peacefully in harmony with itself and nature. Colorful crystal structures or organically shaped objects that had in common almost nothing with what architecture looked alike before were supposed to be the instruments to make this utopia become possible. Now, I'm pushing and nothing is happening. Maybe I need your... Which one is it? No, I have to go down there?
Or you can do it here.
You mean?
Like this.
Okay. Like... Yeah. Where? Where do you push? In the middle?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry. Now, I guess... I hope I won't spoil the lecture. With his Alpine architecture, this is a design of Hermann Finsterlin called Casanova, the new house. That's what it should look like. Well, hell of it, it doesn't work. I'm too stupid with knobs. I mean, buttons are always... What do? You turn the wheel or what?
You just do it.
Oh, well, I have to turn the wheel. Okay, now give me another chance. I'm very sorry. With his Alpine architecture, here you see it, begun in 1917, the German architect Bruno Taut took refuge in the rarefied air of high mountains far remote from the sloths of human existence. Here, the architect raised imaginary cities with crystal edifices to a universal religion in which the exiled pure spirit could find a new home. For Taut, the dream of a new age was brought about by a new spiritual architecture. By redeeming the world, the architect could upgrade and elevate himself into a Weltbaumeister. This is how Taut called it, a master builder of the universe, you could say, or more or less becoming a sort of rival of God himself. If one could speak of an ultimate utopia in architecture, here we would have it. Its topics are quite obvious. First, it fosters the escape from reality into a utopian realm of primordial innocence, combined with a moral futurism in the redemption and liberation of mankind. Second, the utopian aim demands for a totally new kind of architecture, one that, contrary to the old one, would bring about a new heavenly world of peace, purity, and piety that so far had not been allowed to transpose into mundane reality. And third, along with the total overestimation of the moral and social power of architecture, goes an almost surrealistic or ridiculous self-overestimation of the profession of the architect himself and his significance. His role changes from the responsibility for the erection of single buildings into a prophet or missionary. According to the shift, his new profession turns toward the production of exciting images, promising a new world yet to come. For this reason, the performance of high aspirations count. The question whether the imagined architecture of good intentions in reality would contribute to making the world a better place did not matter so much. To the avant-garde architect after 1918, all previous architecture more or less was denounced as being oppressive and unacceptable in general. 20th century modernity judged itself to be unique and beyond compare. In particular, 19th century architecture was despised with great disgust. The expressionist utopia, which only accepted the medieval domes and the Indian pagodas as points of departure, accused the traditional architecture with its walls of stone and urban congestion of being guilty for the decay of mankind. Like Bruno Taut in his manifesto, The Auflösung der Städte, the dissolution of the cities from 1919, explained in a drawing, I hope I can get it, yes. Stone houses would make human beings, or would with hearts of stone. Contrary to this, the new glass architecture then would liberate, cleanse, and purify the humans and result into a new age of peace and harmony. Here in this image it is depicted quite well. On top of it we have the traditional architecture and the city, and it says, let them crush down those mean buildings, and then there is the sentence on the left, Steinhäuser machen Steinherzen, stone houses produce hearts of stone. By the way, and on the bottom, of course, there is the new landscape of modern architecture spreading out in harmony with nature. By the way, this prototype of an architectural theory, stone houses produce hearts of stone, for the simple-minded, which identifies materials and forms with special moral qualities, should not be ridiculed. It persisted in 20th century architecture in many ways. This all too simple formula haunted the German architectural debate after 1945 and again after the unification, in the so-called Berlin architecture quarrel of the early 1990s. The equation of glass and transparency with democracy, and vice versa, the equation of stone and heaviness with dictatorship, if not fascism, ruled the public debates at both times. But this is a very different kind of story. The otherworldliness of the expressionist utopia, aiming at nothing less than the redemption of mankind by means of a new architecture, was rather obvious. Adolf Behne, one of the most important architectural critics in Germany at this time, in 1920 wrote in defense of criticism of expressionist escapism and dreams of being completely unrealistic, I quote, "If the world will become reasonable and will be guided by kindness, then we will help and build. But until so far, we carefully will hold up the pure flame." Let us return to Mies from this point again. From this proud confession of untimeliness in the name of a Holy Spirit that had to be kept like a flame against this evil word. And Mies and his down-to-earth enthusiasm with his uncompromising dedication to the present, to the here and the now. Mies' realist statement, not yesterday, not tomorrow, only today is formable, was meant to be a call to return back from utopian future to real presence, but if considered well, it is as much utopian as it is realistic. It suggests a utopian predominance of the now as a reality independent from past and future. The past could be neglected anyhow as irrelevant, as Mies made unmistakable clear with his laconic remark, one cannot walk forward while looking backward. And tomorrow, in his view, seemed to be nothing else than just another day, logically adding to the present. In this utopia of a pure and independent presence of the now, all mystery or mystifications of continuity, of permanence is eliminated. There is no hidden meaning in the past connecting with the present and vice versa. And as well as there is no presence of the past, the Miesian normative notion of presence remains untouched by dreams which could infuse the reality of today with some presence of the future by pointing at possible different realities of tomorrow. Modern architecture obviously should only attest and affirm to the status quo and to refer to itself and nothing else beyond. This is the objective point of view that Mies adopts in the early 20s and which he will give up only 2 years later. Not unlike the expressionist utopia, Mies' realist utopia or utopian realism of unconditioned contemporaneity is as well dedicated to some spirit of redemption. In this case, the architect does not worship the Weltseele, the soul of the world, like Bruno Taut, but the spirit of the age, the zeitgeist. Mies even goes further with his metaphysics of the present, because he is not only referring to the existence of a new spirit, as Le Corbusier notoriously did, but furthermore to a will of the epoch, a term which suggests time would act itself and follow its own ontological determination. In his 1923 Manifesto Bauen, which you see on the right side in capital letters, building, does it mean building? And in a further statement from 1924 entitled Building Art and the Will of the Epoch, Mies defines the building art as being the spatially apprehended will of the epoch, nothing else. Thus, time itself, endowed with a metaphysical will, would give architectural space its own shape and form. The role left for the architect then only would be to discern and recognize this will by doing justice to the given facts. As Mies explains, the demands of the time for realism and functionality have to be filed. The decisive achievements in all fields are of objective nature. Our utilitarian structures will only grow into the art of building when, by filling their purpose, they become instruments of the will of the epoch. This radical subjugation of architecture to the will of the epoch and the demands of the age of objective nature was not only a reaction to a utopian escapism. Mies merged utopia and reality by charging modern reality with the utopian potential of an objective will in order to arrive at a modern architecture. This, to me, seemed necessary to free architecture from subjectivity and all kinds of, as he labeled it, aesthetic speculation. This intention was obligatory not only in terms to resolve the art of building from the academic notion of architecture, of architecture, represented by historic styles. It seemed as well necessary to defend architecture against contemporary rampant artistry and its aesthetic speculation. Here, Mies targeted at those imaginary architects, or better, image architects, as we would call them today, who only provided images of the future building, but were unable to build and to understand the problems of real architecture, namely construction. This objection was not only directed against the Expressionists, but as well against his constructivist, neoplasticist style fellows. To them, Mies, in his second manifesto, which you see on the right, I mean the text you won't decipher, I just show it for to show it. He refers with the sentence, "We know no form, only building problems. Form as a goal is formalism, and that we reject. No, nor do we strive for a style." That was clear that it meant to be said against the dis-style movement in the Netherlands. Mies was not at all interested into social utopias. For him, ideas about the reality of architecture attached to them mattered. The expressionist idea of an organic building was clearly an aesthetic speculation, creating the illusion as if architecture no longer would be the constructive addition of mechanically assembled parts, but an organism of nature, be it organic or in crystalline form. Apart from this illusion, the tremendous technical difficulties of building curves and irregular shapes realistically had to be taken into account. Erich Mendelssohn, with his famous Einstein Tower, at Potsdam, designed in the year 1917 and built immediately after World War I, went through a painful experience as architect with the execution of his design. Only to manufacture the wooden shuttering as negative form for the liquid concrete turned out to be an almost impossible undertaking. Ship carpenters had to be hired in order to craft the three-dimensional curves. When the tower had reached about 1.5 meter height, the architect finally gave up. Mendelssohn finished the building as a rather conventional brick structure, which distinguished itself from traditional architecture only insofar as the plastering covering the bricks now showed a modern dynamic shape instead of historical ornaments. It was in particular this building Mies in his 1923 manifesto had in mind when writing, I quote, "Ferro-concrete buildings are essentially skeleton structures. Neither pastry nor tank turrets. Weder Teigware noch Panzertürme." Pastry is something that you can, knead with your hands. So these drastic metaphors should make clear something essential about the reality of architecture, that buildings are not modeled out of a continuous mass, but put together in elements and separate parts adding to another. Architecture is not sculpture, but construction. And it is in first place not about mass, but about space enveloped by a material construction. To this, Mies adhered with his metaphor of skin and bone architecture to adequately express the essentials of modern concrete construction. The dynamic, rhythmically moving body, an organism based on masses in motion, shaped as a whole and almost dancing above ground as if the laws of gravity were be suspended. This was Mendelssohn's dream of a future architecture beyond the old additive tectonic system. It should become reality in late 20th century architecture when computer-aided design made it possible to draw and also to manufacture complex three-dimensional forms. Let us leave aside the utopian dreams of an architecture without architecture. This is a phrase the critic Paul Westheim used in order to dismiss the expressionist design in 1922, architecture without architecture, and turn over to the realist side once more. Adolf Behne, claiming in 1919 the presence we have to give up, only 2 years later, in 1921, reveals the expressionist building fantasies as a fata morgana, reproaching the new architects for escapism. I quote, "All building is about standing on the earth, stacking up, seizing reality, the presence. Building is the utmost opposite to fleeing. The German art, however, finds itself under the sign of escape. Utopia as a principle is something absurd. If there is today a certain inclination towards architectural utopia, this is not bad, but only as long as it is not an escape from reality, which means from responsibility, but something comparable to climbing a high mountain in order to look back at the already achieved in a totally new and free manner." I think this is a very nice quotation of what utopia in architecture should be. But let us take a closer look at the supposedly realistic embracing of the now, because the uncritical affirmation of the will of the epoch challenged architecture and architectural reality as well as the expressionist escapist fantasies did. Already in the debates of late 19th century, the quest for architectural realism was raised. Construction and function were considered being its sources. Also, the idea of the Gesamtkunstwerk, of the total artwork, claiming the unity between art and life, demanded the tearing down of boundaries between art and reality. The reform of life became the program of the modern reform movement of the turn of the century. I'm showing you, horrible. I'm showing you a publication by the architect Peter Behrens, and I think the title is very intriguing, Feste des Lebens und der Kunst, which means fests or celebration of art and life, which explains the desire for a unity between art and life at the turn of the century. This program had a significant impact on architecture, a discipline by nature closely connected with the demands of individual and social life. After 1919, overcoming the separation between art and life was the key topic of modern art. Modern art no longer should be understood as a representation, depiction, or a portrait of reality in a more or less true or naturalist manner. Instead, modern art should seize reality itself and directly form it by becoming a part of the general process of modern life. Architecture, profoundly connected with its functional demands and thereby affecting and forming reality like no other art, at first hand could follow this logic of what they call a neue Gestaltung, a new forming. Architecture should become an active collaborator of modern reality. The massive and passive container had to be transformed into an actively participating unit, into a working tool, or we could say into a machine. This is a page out of the magazine that Ernst Mies published. The magazine is called ABC, a very laconic title. And you can't read in German, I suppose, therefore I will translate it. The question is, why are our machines so beauty? First question. And why are our houses not beauty? And the explanation is why the machine is beautiful. The machines are working, moving, functioning. And then related to the houses are not beautiful because they do nothing, standing around, and only just representation and representing. The theoretician Siegfried Giedion in 1927 provided the simple formula to modern approach to modern life in architecture: a maximum amount of air, a minimum amount of wall. The walls separating interior from exterior had to become thin and lightweight. The openings had to grow for the best. Windows would substitute the enclosing wall. Being washed around in air, inside, outside, bottom and top, this is it, what we demand of the new house, Siegfried Giedion further postulated. And I'm showing another book cover, oh sorry, again, the wrong way, of his publication, Befreites Wohnen, Liberated Habitat, you could say, and also the title with a mechanical repetition of light, light, air, air, opening, 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 reminds us of an rhythmical outcry of mankind which wants to be liberated from its imprisonment in the dark dungeons of traditional architecture. The dematerialization of the solidified enclosing was a demand of modern reality to allow a flowing, continuous merging of things one into another. This new infinitude, as Giedion called it, captured the reality of modern life, as well as for Giedion the white-dressed tennis, the tennis dress, the modern, was an equivalent to the lightweight architecture that would capture the sportive perception of one's own body. This time, architectural utopia was nurtured not only by crystalline or organic visions, but the compositional principles of cubist painting, with its floating transparent objects without mass and weight penetrating one another. Mere planes surrounding a floating volume became the new architectural ideal to be codified later by the international style proclaimed by Henry Russell Hitchcock. Oh, this is the wrong, I don't have it here. And Philip Johnson. In this programmatic publication, the aesthetical dogma of supposedly modern architecture in accordance with modern reality was given. It intended an architecture that we could call a de-architecturized architecture, because it should be released from elementary architectural expression such as mass and material and texture, or graining, weight and support, and all relief that would disturb the continuity of the plane surface. To quote, "The prime architectural symbol is no longer the dense brick, but the open box." This is one of the telling sentences of this book, and if one reads it today, one is shocked by the taboos pronounced here in the name of modernity. In order of the purity of the principle of the immaterial lightweight box, subsidiary projecting parts of a building, as it's explained in the text, should be avoided because they are likely to appear solid. Even the placing of windows at the inner edge instead of at the outer edge was treated as, quote, serious fault of design, because it would break the smooth wall surface. Not to mention that architectural elements like cornices, mullions, frames, or other profiles were a totally impossible choice. Everything which would blunt the sharpness of the design and the apprehension of the pure volume and recall buildings of mass and weight, or even worse, of monumentality, was excluded from architectural reality. Once more, it was Adolf Behne who, with his theoretical work, paved the way for this architectural sacrifice in the name of modern reality. In his book, The Modern Functional Building, this is